Hey folks, Rob here. Funny thing happened this week that inspired me to start a new video series I'm going to call A Better Way. And quite literally, one of my coworkers asked me over to look at his code, some very procedural code, and said, is there a better way to do this? And sure enough, there was. So this is a pretty simple example, and I'd like to share it. And I've got a few other ones in mind, and they all come from, real life. So let's look at today's example. And here's today's example. I've got, this is real life too. We're trying to generate an OData filter clause that selects specific items. Now you don't need to know about OData, you don't need to know about filter clauses, you'll get the idea. So these items here, I have an array of two items. Here's one ID, here's the other ID. And what I need to do is, given this array of items, I need to generate a filter clause that says, please select these items. And you can see down here, I recently ran this code. And here's what it generated. It's the correct result. Filter ID equals, and whatever the first ID is. So yeah, it's picking up that ID there. And then it says, or ID equals, and then there's the second ID. So pretty good, pretty straightforward. This code actually works. But what makes it a little complicated is, well, it's this procedural logic. We're going to, how do we do this? Well, we're going to create a string we're going to put the word filter in front, and then we're going to loop through the data. And we're going to treat the first item differently. We're going to say, oh, hey, if it's not the first item, then we're going to stick an or in front. But everything else, but for the first item, we don't do that, and then we add the ID equals whatever it is. So you can see how this code works and how it generates this string. Now I'd like to write this in a different way. So using functional primitives. So let's do that. In particular, we're going to use the map operation, and it'll dramatically simplify this code. So I'm going to call it generate OData filter clause 2 because I'm that original. And we're going to call this. So what do I want to do? Well, the first step I want to do is I want to take this array of test items and I want to convert these objects into the strings that we need. Just I want a string that says ID equals and whatever the ID is. So let's do that transformation first. So I'm going to say let T for transformed equals, actually I'll call it TA for transformed array. Don't worry, it's just temporary. Equals items. Okay, so we're going to take this array of items and we're going to transform it to a totally different array of items. And we're going to call the map operation to do that. That's what you always use. If you have an array of n items, you want to transform it into an array of n different items, we use the map operation. So for each item we're going to do something. And how do we transform it? Well, we take the item, and in this case we're going to take this object here, and we're going to return a different object. And what we're going to return is actually going to be a string, because a string is an object and we're allowed to do that. So let's use the backtick operator, because that makes it easier to generate the string that I want. And you'll see why in a second. I'll go ID equals, and then we need to substitute the value that we need here. And I could have done exactly this here, but I prefer this syntax with the back quotes, because what I can do is just say $ curly brace I.id. So this inside the backticks, this will actually substitute the value that we need. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Then what do we want to do? Well, we've got this array of strings. Well, we'll want to join them together in one big long string. So let's go let s equals. Okay, so I'm going to take this array and I'm going to use the join operation. This is the simplest way to do what we need to do. Pretty simple. And then we're going to, and we're almost ready to return that. So I'm going to call this inner. And by the way, we're going to clean this up even more. This is just so we can step through it and see what's happening. And then finally, what we're going to return will be the filter, we're going to return the filter plus the inner bit plus the final brace. Okay, so let's just put a breakpoint here and run this code now. So we'll go debug, start debugging. Waiting. Here we go. So first of all, we start off with this array of 2 items, right? They're objects. They've got the ID and the other stuff, right? Now, let's just step over this. Let's take a look at this array. This is an array of strings, and it's just ID equals this, and ID equals, don't know if you saw that. Let me hover over it again, and ID equals the next one. So we've transformed our array. We've taken one array called items, and we've transformed it to a different array, right? Then this operation here, this join operation, will take the array of n items, and it's going to join them together into a single string. So let's just step over that. And what we have, there we go. ID, I better just leave my mouse where it is when I do this. ID equals that string, ID equals the first GUID, or ID equals the other GUID. And you can see, hey, that's the main part of what we're trying to generate, and we just need to put it into the filter. So this code actually works. And we can see down here that it generated the same string as before, and it's a lot more concise. It's a lot more concise than this. In fact, it's so concise that I think we don't really need these intermediate variables. We can just chain these things together. So first I'm going to do this. I'm just going to take this and we're going to make this all one operation, and we're going to take this. I'll just cut that and we'll just plow it right in here. So let's run that and make sure it works. We'll just debug that again. We'll step over it. Actually, we'll just let it run, and it generates exactly what we're expecting. So pretty good. We've taken this, we've done it a different way and shortened it up, and it's actually pretty easy to read. Now you can argue that this is hard to read, and I think if you haven't done map operations before, you're absolutely right. If you haven't used lambda statements and map operations, yes, this is trickier to understand than the original code. But once you get used to the map operation, this actually becomes easier to read. When you do a map operation, you're converting one array to another, and you can picture in your head. So eventually, this becomes extremely easy to read, and definitely it's more concise. And I would argue that ultimately it's easy enough to read that this is maintainable and good to go. Plus, we're using very well documented functions like map and join. I did want to mention that join is what I use for joining strings together. Okay, it's perfect for exactly what we need here. Another use case for using join would be if I've got an array of items and I want to turn it into a comma separated list. You can use join. It'd be awesome. There's a more generic function that we could use. I don't need to go into it today, called reduce, where wherever you have an array of items, if you need to do something on every item and then come up with one result, you can use the reduce operation to do that. And in fact, we could write a totally equivalent function using reduce, but for what we're doing here, the join operation is perfect. We're just joining a bunch of strings together and getting a result. So anyways, that's it for today. Please keep map in mind. Use it. You'll eventually learn to love it, and it'll make your code a lot more concise. Hope you enjoyed today's talk. Thank you. Goodbye.